now it's just doing it on steroids. So we're seeing that happen everywhere.
Yeah, and I mean the interesting thing too, I think, is, you know, these aren't necessarily bad, but this is something that is ubiquitous. I mean, anytime I think, and we're going to be talking about this as we go, but anytime you go to a website these days, thanks to GDPR and CCPA, you see those little things that pop up in the bottom and say, "Hey, you know, where we use cookies and how we use," and they're trying to disclose, thanks to the EU, you know, really trying to make things a little bit more transparent as to what data is being collected.
That's right, and that transparency is a good thing. Even though most of us, and you and I were talking about earlier this week, I think about an end user agreement that
Mhm.
companies will have pages and pages and pages of terms that we agree to, and how do we do it? Yeah, we see the terms and we just click that box that says okay, not really considering what they're doing, in their collection of our information. Different countries and even states here in the US are starting to take action. Although, we as end users, we're still clicking that okay, you know, go ahead and collect all my information, even though I really don't know what that means.
Yeah, that's kind of the interesting, and we're both guilty of that, because I know I go, let's just, you know, you're in a hurry and you click through those things. And I think the example I used for you, I saw an article where a guy had hidden in his terms and conditions that the first person who called him out would get a nice bottle of wine, and he said it took like 3 or 4 months for anybody to notice that. And this was a company out of the EU, I think, that does like mortgages and taxes and stuff. So you expect lawyers would be reading those things, and yet they weren't reading them either. So it's kind of fascinating.
No, that's very true. And hey, I have to admit, like you say, guilty as charged. The
Yeah.
last thing that we have time for is to read a whole bunch of legal jargon that we may or may not even understand anyway, if we did read it. And
Right.
when we start looking at the way that this kind of data is being handled, worldwide and by different countries, um, it even opens up some of those things even further. Not to mention those areas within our own websites that may be collecting data as well. And we have to really consider, who's collecting it and what are they going to use it for.
Right. So, and this leads in, I think, to the important part, and this was a big discussion in this memo from Health and Human Services, was the difference between an authenticated and an unauthenticated website, or excuse me, web page. And maybe you could talk a little bit about the difference between these two items.
Yeah, so from a high level, an authenticated website or web page is something that you are logging into, something that that you are going into. You're going to use your credentials, your identity, and you're going to access that. And so it's very targeted to you, and you're going to gather the information back and forth based off of that credential that you've presented. An unauthenticated web page is going to be like just going to Yahoo. I'm just going to go to Yahoo, and it's, I'm not logging into it, although it does seem to know who I am, but I'm not going to log
Right.
into it. And so I'm not being authenticated. I'm not proving who I am.
And the thing that was brought up, which I think is really fascinating in this memo from Health and Human Services, is that, yes, okay, so authenticated websites, that would be like a patient portal, could be an insurance portal for some of our clients, could be a website where like a carrier website, those kinds of things. You're logging in and you have protected information, so you could have PHI, PII, NPI, whatever the alphabet soup of protected health information or personal information could be there. Whereas an unauthenticated website, let's say you have a physician website that is an oncologist who maybe has a scheduling link on an unauthenticated page, that you would be collecting a IP address, email address, and you may be inadvertently passing that on to Google, because you have Google Analytics, which we're going to be talking about a little bit later, on that site, which really opens you up to a situation where all of a sudden Google has potentially has PHI and can identify that something is going on there.
That's right. That's right. And and that's the thing, when our IP address is being collected, we don't think of that as being us, but that is trackable to your actions. And that happens with cookies on your computer. Those cookies, you log in at some point, a little bit of information is stored there in that cookie, and now somebody's able to track it back to you. So we do see that kind of problem, even though you don't know that you're being tracked.
Well, it's great for your Amazon, making sure that Amazon presents what you want, but maybe not for your health information. You don't necessarily want somebody sending you marketing information about health conditions that you've been Googling or looking at, or that is between you and your physician or between you and your insurance company.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
so Google Analytics, this is the big one. This is the big dog. This is the one we see the most of. There are other tracking technologies out there. I don't want to leave out Facebook Pixel, LinkedIn Pixel, some of the other items that are on there that are great for telling your business like what the activity is, but maybe talk a little bit about Google Analytics and in this sense.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I mean, Google is the granddaddy of all of them. Many, I would like to say most, but many websites use Google Analytics because it's very powerful. When you want your website to start getting ranked appropriately, you really want Google to know who you are and where you are, from a business perspective. However, from an end user perspective, how much data do you really want them to put into their database and for them to know all about you? One thing that we didn't talk too much about before, but think about how Amazon collects that data, and how you just happen to have your Amazon app open or your Alexa open, you say something, and that information gets collected. Next thing you know, you're getting targeted ads based on that. The same kind of thing happens with Google. You go to a certain website, those that information, that web search that you did, all of a sudden that goes into a database. Next thing you know, you're starting to get targeted ads based on that kind of thing, that kind of work that you did there. Now take that and think about, we're doing this same kind of thing exponentially, because it's not just the one time that you went to that website on Tuesday, it's the other 14 websites that you went to, throughout the week. And now we're taking all of that data, and we can really target some really interesting things, back to you. And I know that for you, Jason, all the things that you've looked at over online over the last, couple of weeks, I'm sure we can get some really interesting demographical information there.
Oh, I'm sure my data is all clean. I don't know what you're
Yeah,
talking about.
I wasn't implying that it wasn't.
With
But oh, good.
yeah, go ahead. No,
I was just
please.
going to say, but again, Google Analytics, most websites, many websites do use Google Analytics. And if you are an organization that is using Google Analytics, you have to be very careful as to what parts of your website you're allowing Google to actually have access to. Because if you got end user information, you've got your customer information, you may or may not want Google indexing that information.
I would say, in that between the unauthenticated and the authenticated, if you were on an authenticated page, I would caution you that there's very little reason to have Google Analytics on that, and you're better off to ask your webmaster to take it off of that, or if you're not running your apps. I mean, this is something we were talking about
Yeah.
yesterday, or 2 days ago, is just because you've signed a business associate agreement with somebody who's hosting that you're working with a third party who may be hosting your data and may have an application where your clients are interacting with, it behooves you to go and make sure that they aren't using things like Google Analytics on the back end of those applications. And the thing is, Google is very clear. I say clear, it's in their user agreement to not send them any PII, the personally identifiable information, because let's be honest, Google, Amazon, Facebook, all these companies, the way that they make money, the reason things are free is because they're trading in your information. And I don't say that to scare everybody, but I say that in, you have a duty. And if you're here talking to us today, you probably are, you have PHI or access to PHI, protected health information. And part of your custodial duty is to keep that away from Google Analytics. And the Facebook pixels and the LinkedIn. We do not want that information getting over there. So be really careful about what tracking technology you have on there.
Well, absolutely, because once that information is out there, you can never get it put back in there. And so
Yeah.
if you are found to be responsible, either directly or indirectly, it ultimately will affect your business.
Right. And right now, and I want to sort of harp on this a little bit. This is a major enforcement item for Health and Human Services. So they are looking into this. They're looking into the APIs. They're looking into what information is being shared. And this comes into that situation. If you've shared information with Google, you potentially have a breach on your hands that needs to be looked at. And you may need to go ahead and report that information has been sent. And we know that, if you've got Google Analytics on the back end, or again, Facebook Pixel, or any of these other, third parties, that you can't get a business associate agreement with around this. And I think that might be one of our slides coming up, but yeah, your obligation really is you have to get a business associate agreement with that company that is providing that pixel or the analytics code. And let's be honest, none of the big guys will sign that business associate agreement because they know what they're going to do with it. And it's cost prohibitive for them to segment that data off. So I don't know if you want to
Yeah.
say anything around that.
Yeah, no, and that's very true. They're not going to protect that information. That they have very little interest in. They're not in the business of protecting you. You have to protect yourself, and so it's vital that your organization ensures that information that you have that could have been disclosed or could be disclosed to Google Analytics or anybody else, that you do take measures to ensure that you are protecting it.
Yeah. And this also applies to anybody from a Graham-Leach-Bliley standpoint. I want to throw that out there too. In this article, they talked a lot about FTC, which is the enforcement body, the Federal Trade Commission, which is the enforcement body for Graham-Leach-Bliley. So if you're dealing with any financial products, I know we have a lot of insurance agents here. So that's anything that's not a health, dental, vision, long-term care, Medicare, supplemental policies, which would be covered under HIPAA. Anything else, if you're doing a life, short-term, long-term disability, any of those fun things, and the list goes on and on. Those are covered under Graham-Leach-Bliley. You want to make sure that you're not sharing information there also, because we expect that the FTC is going to be enforcing this issue also.
Well, and additionally, you're going to see with some of the new privacy regulations coming out of various states that same kind of thing will happen even at the state level. If it hasn't already, it will be coming very shortly. So no matter what you're doing, you have to protect people's information. And we've talked a little bit about what the definition of PII is, or PHI, and how that all just has continued to change and evolve over time. We're going to see that with all types of privacy items. And so if you're not tracking on this now, or you're not addressing your potential exposures now that you may literally be liable for later, you're going to be well behind the curve.
Yeah. So again, this is a really great conversation to have with any vendors you have. I know a lot of folks, we just, what is it? I think somewhere between like 45 to 50% of the internet, and as far as websites, are run on WordPress. And I know it's easy to do a lot of things like collect information and put Google Analytics on those on that site. Is really do an assessment as to whether you need it on certain pieces for marketing purposes, that's one conversation. But if you have an application or you have an authenticated app or website where you're collecting or sharing PHI, you really need to make sure that you've blocked that and that you've taken that off altogether, probably.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
Yeah. So business associate agreements, and I sort of teased this earlier, is this is an important part of HIPAA. This is different. This is not necessarily your service level agreement. This is a regulatory item that you have to have, and this is more about reporting of breaches and disclosure. So, so one thing that I do want to say here, as I've looked through this and spent the last month and a half being obsessed with this, is I don't see any of the big players signing business associate agreements that cover analytics. And so you've got to be really careful. And this goes back to looking at what is actually covered under your business associate agreement. Google is very clear on it. Office 365 is very clear on it. Not only on what is covered, but how it needs to be configured. So this is a great opportunity, and we talk about every 2 to 3 years. It's a good idea to go back and review all your business associates, but not just this. So I don't know if you have anything to add around that, Rob.
Yeah, just it really just to reiterate, the complexity of privacy and privacy laws do continue to evolve and change all the time. And so your BAAs that you did sign, last year, the year before, a couple of years before that, they may change. Not to mention the way that you handle your business may change, which may all of a sudden now you're doing more things with a vendor, and you may need to make sure that you tighten those things up in your BAAs so that that all aspects are being covered.
Yeah, I would be surprised if everybody, even with like Moore's law, when they talk about that chips, that how they what is it, double every 6 months as far as like and I would say the same thing about your business. I would be surprised if anybody here with us today is doing business the same way they did 2 to 3 years ago. With the way things
Yeah.
have changed and technology has evolved, and that's why it's so important to go back and look at these things and see what people have signed off on. And
W-
the other thing is we see a lot of people who sign business associate agreements blindly. They just see it as something that is a line item they need to get, but are they really HIPAA compliant? So that's another conversation.
Yeah,
Um,
no,
Go ahead.
absolutely. And it does, when we talk about Moore's law and we look back in time, if you go back, 20, 30 years with Moore's law, it was about every 18 to 24 months, the number of chips would double in systems. And I think really what's happened is over time, everything, especially in this area, is not just doubling every 18 to 24 months, but we're actually seeing it exponentially evolving. Think about how long has the iPhone been out? What is it?
Yeah,
15 years? Look at the
yeah.
internet. The
Hmm.
internet, we're what, 20 years into the internet as we know it, basically. And think about how dependent we've become on that. The same kind of thing happens with all of this information. The amount of information, because technology has advanced so far, organizations are able to collect more and more data and more information about us because they can store it in much bigger databases. They can rapidly gather that information and act on it, instantaneously. So they don't worry about how much data they're collecting. Collect it
Yeah.
all and then some, because
Right.
we're able to query it and respond, very quickly. Look at how things like AI is working, and the impacts
Mhm.
of AI, to the point where you can replace human interaction because it's able to act that fast. And that's a whole nother topic that we'll have to explore sometime.
Yeah, I think we'll have to do that. We'll have to have another webinar around that one because of the way and the just how quickly things are changing. I mean, geez, it's changed a lot of the way things are have happened in the last 6 months, even I would say, and I expect it to continue to evolve rapidly with everything going on. But yeah, to sort of reiterate what you were talking about. I mean, I kind of laugh because I was thinking, 2009 was the High Tech Act for HIPAA. And a lot of that was, we had President Obama who was really pushing, and HHS was pushing to digitize records at that point in hopes for not only security, but also to sort of, for flexibility, but also, to lower costs in saying, okay, if we digitize these records. And it's hard to think back to that because everything's digital now. You just expect that your records are going to be available in a portal from your physician at this point, and you can go see what your, test results are within 24 hours and all these things, but it's not been that long.
No, no, it really has not. And and we're going to continue to see that get faster and faster and faster. And
Right.
we as society, we need to protect ourselves. So you have to think about
Yeah.
how your information is being tracked, which is going to also mean that we're going to start looking at our vendors that we may use and our the
Hmm.
different businesses that we use and patronize, and we're going to consider, gee, they did a good job or they didn't do a good job at protecting our information.
Well, and this is, the what to do. And I think the big thing here is, I mean, this is why we at Total HIPAA push, not even push, we require our clients who are in our HIPAA Prime program to do an annual risk assessment because and refresh those items and do those business, starting to audit those business associates more carefully because of the common agency provision, which means, hey, if my vendor has an issue, it becomes my issue. It's not just I signed a contract, I signed a business associate agreement, so it's Acme Incorporated's issue. It is Acme had a breach. It's now my breach, and I've got to handle this.
Well, and a key point in that, a few years ago, there was a breach, big issue that Target had as a result of their HVAC vendor. Okay, and
Mhm.
everybody knows about Target having the breach, and it wasn't, no one thinks about, oh, it was the HVAC, Bob's HVAC system or whatever it was. I couldn't even tell you who that specific HVAC vendor was, but that was how the breach occurred. Was somebody came in through the HVAC vendor and got into Target's network. You know, but we all know about Target having the breach. The same kind of thing
Right.
could happen here. No one's going to remember the vendor that had the
Mhm.
issue. They're going to know that you had the issue, and so you want to take whatever measures are necessary to help protect against that.
Yeah, Stanford hospitals had a big breach like that where they had shopped out. It was around kidney, they were putting something together around kidney like dialysis and stuff like that. And they had a vendor who had shopped out looking for for a subcontractor to do some analytics work around that, and had put the data up on an unsecured website, and it sat out there for at least 6 months. It may have been over a year, and it was discovered, and it was a huge fine for Stanford hospitals. I think it ended up being hundreds of thousands, which they ended up paying, I think, 50,000 and putting a 200,000 on to their business associate. But again, we remember it's Stanford, not the business associate, because they are the entity that ultimately was responsible.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And the whole analytics world that's a whole nother area that's continuing to grow. So even when you think about the data that you might have on your website that may or may not be accessible, that may or may not be PHI, in today's definitions, who knows what that's gonna look like, later on. And when we look at dissimilar or information that we may not even recognize as being specific to individuals, we may need to rethink some of that. Jumping back to another Target example. I don't know. Maybe I feel really
Mhm.
bad about Target, but a number of years ago, they were looking at shopping patterns and looking at the data
Mhm.
patterns of shoppers. And based on those patterns, they could predict somebody that was expecting a child. Well, what they were able to do was they looked, and it was weird items, I don't know, 5 or 6 items. If
Mhm.
you shop for these 5 or 6 items, high likelihood that you are expecting. And so then they would market towards those individuals. Well, they wound up marketing to a very young woman, baby supplies. Father got furious that that his daughter was receiving this marketing material from Target, congratulating her on having a baby. As it turned out, she didn't even know she was pregnant, but Target,
Wow.
knew. So you look at the data. I mean, it has very little to do with specifically what we're talking about here. But you think about the
Right.
data that can be collected off of somebody's website and how
Mhm.
that can all be put together and then target your customers that are in your system and make those kinds of inferences.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we are like 2 minutes to time, and I want to be cognizant of your time today, Rob. And I so appreciate you coming and joining us today. And I could talk to you all day, but we should jump in. I think it looks like we have at least one question. It looks like my present BAA was chosen some years prior to COVID. Do you have somewhere I can go and get a good standard BAA form? Yes, we have one on our website. You can get for free if you go to our homepage, totalhipaa.com. We have a business associate form there that is free. You just have to register and download it. And that's a great place to start. A lot of your vendors will have business associate agreements that you'll just have to accept, like your Googles and your Office 365s and the big boys on the block will sort of force their issues onto you. But otherwise, for your smaller vendors, that's one that we have there that our lawyer has vetted for you, and we give that away for free. I think that is we're coming right up. We got you right at 2:30, guys.
Perfect. Perfect.
Boom, boom. Rob, it has been a real pleasure. Folks, if you guys have any additional questions, please reach out to us at Total HIPAA. We are happy to, here's our information. You can drop us an email, or you can give us a call here. But this is our information, and we so appreciate everybody's attending and giving us your time today. And Rob, got you out right under the gun. So thank you so much, my friend. We'll see you
Thank you,
soon.
everybody. Have a great day.